Hey, I'm Bob. Matt is currently out sick today, so I'm going to be taking over. It says here I'm supposed to show his entire journey through 2D design. Well, that should be easy enough. It says here he had quite a bit of fun, that he learned quite a bit of how to draw and paint. He also discovered that he is better at drawing things than he thought when he just applied himself. Anyway, here's how this video is going to work. I am going to take you guys through this course week by week from his perspective. What he learned and what he had to do. With each week, I will go over the terms they learned. Most of these terms are on the definition sheet he linked in the description. Any term not listed there will be briefly covered. After that, we will look at the image examples for that week and why he chose it. Following that will be artist time. Artist time is dedicated to the artist that we covered in that week. Well, if there is one. Moving on from that will be the exercises that they had to do that week. And if there was a project he submitted, I'll cover that as well. Got it? All right, let's go. Okay, so here are the terms for week 1. If you'll notice, they're mainly centered around line and things line related. This is a common thing that will happen throughout all the weeks. Whatever the theme of the week is what the terms will be based around. Sorry, here's the terms. If you will notice, there are 2 terms that do not show up on the definition sheet. That would be volume summary and cross contours. I think I'm saying that right. Volume summary is a drawing style that communicates information through the basic use of volumes. Cross contours are using curved parallel lines to create the illusion of three-dimensionality. The image he chose was Metamorphosis of Narcissus by Salvador Dali, and what he said was, while a rather complex composition, line still has quite a bit of play in this piece. There are plenty of implied lines, starting at the corners and leading the viewer towards the focal point of the painting, like the hand-like structure. There's no artist for this week, so I guess we're just going to have to skip that part for now. There was one exercise that week, and that was the practice thumbnails. Thumbnail sketches are quick sketches, usually no more than an inch in size, that show the very basics of what you want to achieve with a larger composition. This exercise would be practice for the real thumbnails next week. And this is what he drew. Here you can see him practicing things such as cross-hatching, or messing around with the orientation of his lines. Okay, in reality, he was just doodling, but that's what we're gonna say, okay? Okay, terms, go! Alright, every term in this week is on the definition sheet, so I don't need to be covering any extra terms. The image Matt chose was Detroit Industry North Wall. It's a mural. And what he said was, I like the balance between both the organic shapes of the humans taking up the bottom part of the image, in contrast to all the geometric shapes of the factory taking up the negative shapes of the composition. The bottom half is divided by rectilinear shapes, mainly the airline pipes which create panels. The top half is more so curvilinear shapes. Alright, artist. Hey, we actually have one for this week. So, the artist for this week is William Golden. William would define the post-World War II design scene with his work at CBS. If you've ever watched CBS and seen the CBS eye logo, that was him! Through the use of point, he taught us that our logos can be bold, but simple. The exercise for week 2 was the thumbnails for the first project. You can see he did all sorts of stuff, however, only one was chosen for his project. Feel free to take a guess. And there were no projects this week. That'll be next week. Moving on. Alright, here's the terms. Alright, the only term this week that needs to be defined is engraving. You know what? This is taking too long. I'm just going to use text. Like, some of these weeks have 12 terms to define. I don't want to draw all those out individually. I'm just going to use the inbuilt text on this program. So, engraving is the process of carving dots and lines into a thin sheet of copper. Ink is pressed into the grooves, which is printed onto a damp piece of paper using a printing press. And for the image for this week's terms, Matt said, there is a lot of stippling going on in this piece. A lot of textured dots are used to create different texture values between sky and ground, along with other parts of the image. The image itself is pretty Art Deco in style. Oh, artist! The artist for this week is George Olden. George Olden was one of the first African Americans to find work in the growing television industry of the 60s, as the graphic design director for CBS's television division. Say that fast 3 times. He would be responsible for pioneering the new use of artistic and creative title cards for television programs. And for this week's exercise, we had to watch a video on how to draw textures on cubes. Then follow along. This was his result. Not much else to say here. And finally, we see our first project. Project 1 was meant to have 3 5x7 cards. The first card would have a simple line art drawing, and each drawing after that would become more abstract as it progressed. So here is the first frame. There is a lot of negative space surrounding the wrench as it floats in the frame. Notice the thicker vertical lines that offer support at smaller sections of the wrench. There's also a little bit of hatching to create shading, but not much. Alright. Looking at the second image, it begins to become more abstract. Even more negative space is introduced. Little details like the hatching below each shape makes them appear to float. We can also see some of the rectilinear shapes begin to transform into curvilinear shapes. Frame 3, the most abstract of the bunch. Matt feels as if he could have spread the shapes out better, made it even more abstract, but what's done is done. More cross-hatching is introduced, as you can see in some of these shaded areas. Only curvilinear shapes make up the composition. Some of the negative space around the shapes has been filled by thick diagonal lines. In my opinion, this flattens the overall image. The wrench is no longer floating. Alright, starting with the terms as always. Alright, this week we have 5 terms that need to be defined, starting with value distribution. Value distribution is the proportion and arrangement of lights and darks in a composition. Volumetric, when values are used to make a 2-dimensional shape appear 3-dimensional. Attached shadows, values that directly define the basic form. Cast shadows, values that define the shadows that would be made by a form. And, how do you pronounce it? Grisaille. Gray underpainting used to create the illusion of 3-dimensionality. And here's the image attached to these terms. This is what Matt said. While this is a photograph and not a drawn piece, there are still some terms that could apply to it. The definition that first came to mind when looking at this photo was value distribution. This is a very high contrast piece, with the foreground being almost completely dark, the background being very light. This puts focus onto the outline of the elk in the photo. The artist for this week is David Carson. David Carson is a graphic designer centered around typography. For this week, we focused on a TED Talk by Carson. If you want to know more about any of these artists, feel free to look them up in your free time. These are meant to be short tidbits. Anyways, Carson talked about how one needs to utilize who they are in their work. No one else has your background. This is how you create unique work and better enjoy yourself while doing so. Dog, why are you making noise behind me? Stop making noise. The exercise for this week was another set of thumbnails. This time it was the thumbnails for Project 2. Take a look. The focus was to come up with textures to be used on Project 2. Everything here is a visual texture. Nothing is physical. Nearly everything in this image contains real textures from physical objects. Terms. There's a lot of terms. Well, this is going to get blurring very quick. Nothing. Never mind. You know what? I'm just gonna give it to you all at once. I'm tired of having to edit every single part. Besides, I'm running out of time. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 terms again to define, starting with color theory, the art and science of color interaction and effects. Process colors, transparent primary colors used in processing printing. Nailed it. Color interaction, the way colors influence one another. Simultaneous contrast, the apparent change in a color when it's paired with another color. And opponent theory, the cones in our eyes can only register one color in a complementary pair at a time. Here is the image, as always. And Matt said, I chose this painting of pure color. The painting gives off a very warm feeling, temperature-wise. The subtle mixes of orange and tan/yellow create changes in temp from warm to warmer. I'm so sorry if I mispronounced this. The artist for this week was Lourdes Zolzezi. I think I'm saying that right. I'm really sorry if I didn't. Zolzezi is a Mexico-based artist famous for her contributions to graphic design through her posters that center around topics such as violence, hunger, children's rights, and nature. She goes beyond just art by working alongside psychologists and social workers when helping children with HIV and rehab. Man, what an amazing woman. Exercise 5 was a painting demonstration where we had to follow along with the video. Here was his results. The focus was mainly on repetition of color patterns. It says here that he did it with his mom. What fun! Project 2 centered around texture. We had to use 20 different textures to create a drawing of our own faces. Well, in this case, Matt's face. Alright, and here's the piece. Wait, no, that's not right. He was supposed to fix this. Okay, looks like I have to do it myself. One moment. Okay, here is the improved version. You can see that I had to do quite a bit of stippling to make the upper parts of the hair much darker. I tried to add a bit more volume and cover up some of the harsh edges of the head to make it look more natural. We can see all the textures that were in the thumbnail sketches being used. My favorite part is that eye through the broken glass with the lizard eye and the lizard skin. That part's really cool. Hey, you know the drill by now. Here you go. We have 6 terms to define this week, starting with color harmony, the theory of how colors relate to each other and how certain combinations can be used to varying effects. Chromatic gray, instead of using black and white, a mixture of various hues between the two values is used. Earth colors, color that tends to be found in soil or other warm and natural colors, hence the name earth. Disharmony, the opposite theory of using color schemes that clash or would not work under normal circumstances to create unusual or disturbing images. Composition, combining multiple parts into a harmonious whole. Color key, a dominant color that can heighten psychological as well as compositional impact. Here is the image that Matt chose, and he said, the word for this piece would either be analogous or monochromatic. For the color scheme, the wide variety of yellows creates the illusion of light in space, giving the image a gritty, Polaroid-like quality. Oh, artist. This week's artist is Alan Bell. Another very influential artist in his own right, Alan Bell would create the first black gay magazine to be circulated. Thanks to his work, the previously underground gay scene for the black community was finally able to see the light of day and bring attention to some of the issues that were going on within it. Exercise 6 was the thumbnails for the third project. The project would be focusing on splitting up an image into 3 separate color schemes. Here you can see the various ways he came up with solutions for various photos that he had taken over the years. I wonder which one he's going to pick. We'll find out next week. Alright, terms. Only 4 to define this week. We have fusion, when shapes or volumes are placed so close together that they share common edges. Movement, using continuity to create deliberate visual pathways to help direct the viewer's attention to a particular area of interest. Focal point, wait, this was already defined. Why am I defining it again? Grid, the pattern that is created by a series of intersecting lines. Here is the photo that Matthew chose for this week. He said, This photo, at least in my mind, shows a somewhat strong use of repetition. This repetition of shapes manifests through the repeated circular shape of the water droplets, along with the shapes of the light within each. The artist for this week is Saul Bass. Saul Bass is the reason why movies and shows now have title sequences. Before Saul, you might have gotten the name of the show in a placard. Saul thought outside of the box and created the philosophy that the movie should begin with a title sequence that should convey what we are about to watch to the viewer. Exercise 7 was another follow-along activity. This time we would be doing ink drawings to create optical illusions. This is what he drew. Project 3 was a painting project. The goal was to create a composition of an image that was split into 3 basic color schemes. The color schemes are as follows. The blue is monochromatic, or all the same color. The orange and yellow is analogous, using colors close to each other on the color wheel, and the red and green part is complementary. I'll let you view this for a bit before moving on. I don't even need to say anything at this point. You know what's going to happen. Alright, 4 terms. We have approximate symmetry, when similar imagery appears on either side of a central axis. Imbalance, when the shapes and visual elements of a piece are no longer balanced, symmetrically or asymmetrically. We have anomaly, a break in the norm, something that stands out. And centricity versus eccentricity, a compressive compositional force versus an expansive compositional force. Here is the image. Matt said, in older Geico ad, this image shows an example of asymmetrical balance. Look at how the cookies stack up compared to the center line of the image. The tall tower of cookies is near the center, while the single cookie is off to the side. It remains balanced because the small image is put way out, while the heavier image is close to the center. The artist for this week is Leroy Winbush. One of the earlier important black figures in design history, Leroy Winbush would break barriers by founding his own studio. He would be signed on to create album covers for Mercury Records. He was also responsible for designing the layouts for magazines such as Jet and Ebony. Exercise 8 was the thumbnails for Project 4. We had to create sketches for 4 5x7 cards, each showing a different concept. Here's what he drew. Okay, terms, week 9. Want to know something? Every term this week is not on the definition sheet, so I have to define them all. Oh boy. Alright, let's go. 12 terms. Linear perspective. A mathematical system for projecting the apparent dimensions of a three-dimensional object onto a flat surface. Picture plane. The surface that a flat object is projected onto. Vanishing point. The point at which objects will disappear entirely. Eye level / horizon line. The line which would be level with an artist's eyes, in the place where vanishing points are placed in the basic 1 or 2 point perspective. Cone of vision. The perceived cone that would extend from our eyes out towards whatever object we are viewing. 1 point perspective. The perspective that is used to represent a frontal view of a scene. 2 point perspective. The perspective that is used to represent an object that is in an angled space. 3 point perspective. A perspective using tilted lines that converge on a third vanishing point. Atmospheric perspective. The way shapes will blur the further away we get from them, as if dust or water droplets are beginning to obscure them from our view. Amplified perspective. The exaggerated use of perspective. Fractured space. Combining multiple viewpoints to make a composition. Layered space. When the foreground, middle ground, and background are all clearly defined. Here's the image for this week. And Matt said, "Just look at this piece. Take the time to take in all the details. This is among the Sierra Nevada mountains, California. This shows atmospheric perspective through the use of ever-blurring shapes, and through the incredibly detailed and semi-transparent clouds covering the background. The amount of detail in Albert's work is astounding. It draws you into the piece, invites you to look around, to be there. His paintings have a quality to them that a photo of the same scene could not capture." Alright, artist. Aaron Douglas. Known as the father of African American art, Douglas would establish the African Art Deco style. He brought together the ways of the past, drawing on traditional native drawings, and combined them with the future to set up a specific style during the Harlem Renaissance that would inspire an entire generation of art styles. Exercise 9 was a photo exercise, where we had to find several similar objects with one that shows emphasis. Matt decided once again to use one of his own old photos. This one here. The white hats stand out from the rest of the image, and that is why it's emphasis. Project 4, the final drawing project before the final project would be due. For this project, we had to create 4 5x7. Okay, they're probably not 5x7s. I just got that wrong. Oh well, continuing. Cards, each one showing off a different concept. Repetition, unity in variety, balance, and emphasis. Here's the first drawing for repetition. Again? He said he would fix these. Welp, it looks like it's up to Bob to save the day again. Alright, here's the fixed version. I made the lines thicker and easier to see. Now, this card is repetition. The theme for these cards is circles. This one has the repetition of bouncing circular shapes throughout the composition. The second one is unity in variety, again with the circles, which is the unifying theme. However, there's a variety through different circle-like shapes with the swirls, along with the inverted colors to create a bit of contrast. The third one is emphasis. Matt used India ink for this one. The singular perfect circle is the focal point of the piece, while all the other circles become less and less circular, along with becoming darker. The final piece is balance. Matt did a line down the middle for this one, using different shapes and sizes of circles over a center line. Each side is the same, except for their inverted colors. Week 10. Here's your terms. There's only one, okay. And it's not defined. Oh well. Kinesthetics, the science of movement. Alright, now that was easy. Moving on. The artist for this week was Paula Scher. I think I said that right. For Paula Scher, I have decided to include Matt's take on the documentary that he watched on her for class. Learning about the ways in which Paula Scher influenced typography to the degree in which she has made for one of the better documentaries I have seen in quite a while. Identity is what makes us who we are, and that first glance usually defines something for us. Paula revolutionized the way that type can convey meaning to us to translate what something is before we even begin to read about it. You create this bold statement about what you represent with your logos, or your font, the way things are positioned on the page. Who would have thought that the slightest shift in a letter can convey a completely different sort of meaning? And now we find ourselves at the end of the video. Man, that was fun. I didn't know Matt did all that stuff. Well, here's to a great...
Hey, man.
Uh-oh.
Get out of my seat.
It's not what it looks like.
Get out of my seat.
Stop.
Man. Are you... Great. Well, that was supposed to be my project. Come on, man. Well, I can't do much about it now. Well, anyways, thank you guys for watching. Hopefully you learned a thing or two from Bob over here, who completely stole my entire project. I'm sick. Well, I have a summer to enjoy, so see y'all next time round.